Welcome to URL Unzip, Reboot and Leave, a podcast about the psychology of everything. Through real conversations with thinkers, doers, and seekers, we explore how humans adapt, evolve, and thrive across migration, entrepreneurship, healing, culture, and the search of meaning. So let's unzip, reboot, and leave. Today, our guest is founder of Create Foundation. She was council member in World Economic Forum, former CEO of the Foundation of Young Australians, strategic advisor for World YMCA. University of Sydney awarded her honorary D.Litt. She is also an author of Every Childhood Lasts a Lifetime and Future Chasers. Please welcome Jan Wen AM. So straight to the thing, because you are an entrepreneur, you have worked extensively in non-government sector, worked with different types of Australian leaders. Australian corporate are often seen as risk averse, conservative, you know. And do you think things needs to be changed? It is changing, but do you think things needs to be changed more faster?
Well, I think a couple of things need to change. I think we still have a very low representation of women, particularly in the boardroom and also at the C-suite level. So I think, one of the things that drives innovation is often having diversity, right? So diversity of thought, diversity of gender, diversity of culture. So I think, you've got to also look at kind of what's happening at the top in these organizations, who's on their board, who's in their C-suite, and that tells you a lot about their capacity for innovation, I think, and how they're driving innovation and taking risks. So there are definitely things that we could do better at, but I would start with looking at who's in these organizations, what are their roles, and what are they doing that are enabling them to have that diversity of thought.
So you mentioned about a woman.
Mm.
There are hardly very less representation of people with color also,
Yeah.
right? So that is also kind of a part of it. And these things are coming from a perception or a societal understanding. How long? Because you are working, what, more than 5 decades, right? Or around 5 decades. So how long does it really take for this kind of societal or community or organizational shift of biasness?
Mm. Well, I think what happens is once there is a certain level of awareness, then things start to shift. So, and often we say that it takes a generation to shift things, which isn't very fair because, of course, there's been many generations of multiculturalism in Australia. And Australia has, 45% of Australians, their parents come from a non-English speaking background. So we actually have an incredibly diverse culture here in Australia. So
Mm.
it isn't represented, as you say, in the kind of boardrooms and in the places where we would want it to be represented. So there's kind of no excuse for the fact that we don't have a multicultural society because we do. I think it's more about what are the opportunities for people to progress and to find themselves in those roles. So, there are some fantastic organizations do outstanding recruitment for early entry jobs, right? Some organizations do fantastic recruitment for, women, getting women involved. But, the gender pay gap is still very real. There's still a pay discrepancy for people in the same role in Australia, in professional services, in law, in a whole bunch of different industries. So I think that the focus on, it takes a generation to change. I think we have had that generation in Australia, so I don't think there's any excuses. But I do know that once we get moving, and once organizations start to do these, they get much better results once they do start moving and do start diversifying their hiring practices and their senior leadership and so on.
Because I'm Indian origin, so I am like mid or late 40s,
Mm.
and as you said, the generational sometimes it takes because the people who are actually in those high level, they are not thinking in terms of this. So
Yeah.
now almost my generation is in the leadership space. So
Mm.
they are also probably coming from that diverse background. So now probably they are encouraging or pushing this envelope, right?
Yeah, I hope so, because what we've seen is that, there was a classic experiment, in the last decade where they surveyed in America anyway, the CEOs, and I think they had two names, like Peter was one of them. So if you were called Peter and mostly you were white and you were 6 foot tall, you got the CEO job kind of thing. They literally did this research. So I think people then hire people like themselves, and definitely we've found on boards that boards attract people like themselves of these in these companies. So as you say, if you can change who's in the C-suite and if you can change who's on a board, then they also start to attract a different group of people. So we get that kind of diversity. But I think that understanding that people tend to employ or attract or hire people like themselves, you have to really break out of a mindset to actually be more diverse and to think actually it's better to have women, it's better to have people of color. I'm going to get better results. I'm going to get better diversity of information and knowledge and strategy and better innovation.
Okay. What is your view on universal basic income?
Well, I think I'm going to have a view very quickly, very soon, don't you? Because of AI. I think that depending what happens with AI, whether we really use it to unleash creativity or whether we just use it to decrease kind of the kind of human jobs, is, that's the big difference, right? One of those unleashing creativity will mean that everybody gets to work differently and hopefully through with their passions and their interests and use the tools. If we just use AI to just do all the work that everyone's doing, and so the work narrows and narrows and narrows, I think it's going to be very, very challenging. And I think lots of people will lose their jobs. So the jury's out. We don't know which way we're going to go, whether we're going to go to a great utopian future or a great dystopian future. But what I do know is that there is definitely jobs that are being lost now that aren't being replaced yet. And so there could be a gap in the transition. And so we have to look after people. It's incredibly important that we work out what's the safety net. So universal basic income, I think it was perceived as more than a safety net. It was perceived as a way of freeing up people, right? So you can have a unit, no matter what happens, you'll have this basic income to build upon, and you can pursue your interests and your passions, and you'll make money on top of that. I mean, in a way, it's interesting that that's being talked about in places like the US. In a way, we already have that in Australia. We already have a safety net. We already have unemployment benefits, as do many countries in Europe, the Scandinavian countries. So it's a bit of a moot point for us here, I think, because the rate of the universal basic income that was being spoken about, I think was actually at some point it was below what our unemployment benefit is in Australia. It was like 20,000 a year or something. But that matters in places where there is no safety net. For us in Australia, I think it's kind of an interesting different, the base rate would have to be quite high for people to live in the way that they have lived now if they were to suddenly lose their income or lose their job. So yes, UBI in places where there is no safety net, where there is a safety net, we need to work out a very different system about how value is created in our society and how that is valued, how value is created and what value we put on that.
I mean, I have an observation on that. 25, 20 years back when I came to Australia,
Mm.
when I used to call to my country, India, $1 for 1 minute.
Mhm.
Now with WhatsApp and all, it's almost free.
Yeah.
Also.
Yes. Yeah.
Last 50 years, worldwide, population increased 3 times, food production increased around 300 times. Okay,
Yeah.
but still there are a lot of people are not eating the right way, which is a different story altogether.
Mm.
Sometimes I feel that eventually everything will be free. So you have all the resources. So it's up to you whether you will have what
Sense of learning or explore?
Will everything be free? Well, actually, such an interesting question, isn't it? Because will everything be free? Because yes, those things will be free, but without a tax base, who will pay for our free health system?
Two.
Instance, will the corporations be have to pay 10x what they pay now in taxes? Like who will pay for our free education system? Someone like right now, we all pay for it because we're working. But if we're not working and everything's free, those things won't be free. Someone and so we're going to this very, very interesting phase. And one of the discussions has been, well, if there's going to be a kind of a monopoly on the market, then those companies will have to pay. They'll have to pay very, very high taxes to underwrite the things that we take for granted. And particularly, as you know, in Australia, a free health system, a free education system, and NDIS that we were talking about earlier.
Okay.
These things are paid for by us as taxpayers. If we're not paying tax, because we're not working and everything's free, we're still going to expect those things. I assume I'm still going to expect free hospital, free schools, NDIS support. So we are in a very interesting, it's interesting in a place like Australia, I think that has a strong democracy and has a strong support for individuals and families and communities. As to if the tax base lowers to such an extent, where will the income come from? It'll have to come from taxing companies.
Yeah. Okay. You already touched upon it, but still, I would like to listen a little more on it because I know have non, you are not biased into typical feminism. So, how you define equality in today's context?
For women,
Yeah, for women or like other equalities
yeah,
also.
or
Like,
any marginalized
yeah,
group.
exactly.
I mean, I think we all know now today we're all much more sophisticated and we know equality isn't just give the same people everything. What we know now is that equity is more important. So what do you need to thrive versus what do I need to thrive? And they could be completely different things. So there are some basics, and I think that pay equity is a basic thing. If you've got two people doing the same job, but somebody is one gender and somebody's another gender and they're not being paid the same thing, that's obviously patently unfair. But the equity story is much more nuanced. And, I work in education, as you know. And so, one of the most important things in education is are children and young people receiving the support that they need, not universal. We're way beyond now the kind of one teacher, 30 students, kind of industrial system of education. We're now moving and we're in a massive transition to personalized education, and that's incredible. And the same with health. I mean, all our data is now deeply personalized. So I feel like equity is the most important issue. And if you are marginalized for whatever reason, if you're a woman, if you're from a marginalized community or group, then equity becomes even more important that you have access. And how do you get access? You get access by things being created in the work that I do, co-designed with your community. So what do you need as an individual? What do you need as a community? What do you need as a new migrant coming to Australia? It's no point white Australians sitting around deciding that, right? It's most important to sit with people who are coming and saying, what do you need and how can we co-create that and co-design it for you? So I think all the work that's been going on in co-design around Australia, including in government as well as in non-profits, the work going on in personalised education and learning in schools, the work that is going to literally blow health out of the water in terms of your individual metrics and the tools that you'll have to monitor your own health and well-being. This is so much of this is about access and equity. The NDIS was all about put the power in the hands of the person with a disability. So it's profound. And the NDIS is still one of you talked about innovation at the front end. The NDIS is still one of the greatest government innovations in the world. and acknowledged as so from Australia. So we can do it and we do have that capacity, but that is so much. Of course, it's not perfect, but
Mm.
that's so much about equity. So we're equality at one level, but then equity is what we want. Does everybody get what they need in the right time, in the right way to thrive and to flourish?
So this equity thing, I first heard of maybe 4 or 5 years ago from one of my US friends. In my work or in business journey, in many spaces, I have encountered the tension between, serving the cause and feeding the ego, you
Mhm.
know, and more insecure you are, more bigger ego you have.
Mm.
So, and to do all these, to shift the envelope or to push the boundaries and all these things, how can I become more effective in identifying and eliminating those suckers or takers from the system? Or in
You
a
say
corporate,
suckers and takers.
yeah, or in a corporate culture, like you need those kind of people also. I don't get it.
Well, it depends what I mean, obviously for founders, I mean every founder at some level. I was having this conversation with somebody the other day on a podcast that I'm doing, which is, every founder at some level is a little bit of a narcissist. You kind of have to be. You have to have this self-belief, this undaunting self-belief that you're going to do the thing that you want to do and that you're going to make it. I mean, it would be impossible to be a founder without that and to start anything. So, whether it's narcissistic or whether it's just this immovable self-belief or just, outrageous confidence, you kind of do need to have that. And sometimes that will rub people up the wrong way, but there is an element of that in everybody. I think the best founders I know, though, very much understand, and they understand very, very quickly that having an idea is not enough. There's a million good ideas a day. We all have them. That it's actually the people who execute on those ideas, who make them happen, they're the people that matter. And those people know that there's no way they can do it without others. They just can't. You need a team because you know that there is no one person, one man band on starting anything. The smartest people build a team really quickly with the skills that they don't have. And the smarter the founder, which is often actually the older the founder, the faster they will go and get people on their team who have got skills that they don't have. And that's clever and smart, and that will help you get to scale quickly. So I think it's okay to have that ego. I think you need to get out of your own way quickly. I think you need to identify and have high levels of self-awareness and emotional intelligence, not just IQ, but emotional intelligence, EQ, to work out what you don't know and very quickly find those people to help you build. And if you can do all that, if you can get out of your own way, if you can manage your own ego, and if you can build your team quickly with the skills you don't have, then you're going to have a much better chance of being successful.
Mm, okay. Please tell us a little more on your first book, Childhood. Every childhood lasts a lifetime.
Uh,
Wow.
Well, when I was quite young, I set up an organization called the Create Foundation. And the reason I set that up was for children and young people who had been removed from their families because of abuse and neglect. And so they were put into foster care or into state care of some kind. And the state becomes your parent at that point if you're removed from your families, the state being a government, really, the state government. And I realized in some work I was doing at that time with young women who were in care, state care, that they didn't realize that they were not alone. They kind of thought it was just them, and also even something that they had done that had had them removed from their family, not something that had happened through one of their parents or through a family member. So I've thought about this and I thought, wow, what needs to happen is these young people all need to know each other. And so we set up Create Foundation. And so the very first time we brought 150 of them together in Sydney, all these children from care, and they were in foster care, and they all came together, and we said, you know, you can, and they walked into this massive room. It was like at a conference center, and they said, wow, who are all these people? And we said, well, these are other young people, sort of age 16 to 24 at that age group, who are in care, in state care. And they were like, what? I thought I was the only one. And we said, not only are there this 150, there's 20,000 others in Australia. By the way, today there's 50,000. That was then. So Create was formed as a consumer group, a peer consumer group, the first one really in Australia that was for children and young people to connect and to advocate for their own rights and for themselves. And then out of that, to your question, I wrote a book called Every Childhood Lasts a Lifetime, which was really I interviewed a whole lot of people who'd been in care, young people who had just come out of care at 18, and then people who were in their 70s that had been in care as children and as young people. And I interviewed a whole group of them and found out about their life stories. And my conclusion was that their childhood had lasted for their whole lives. It had impacted every single part of their life, their relationships, their families, their own parenting, their mental health very severely, because most of them had not got the support and help that they needed when they came out of state care. They'd just been kind of at 18, it's like, you're free, go out into the world and make your life. And with devastating results, because in that care system, many of them had had good experiences, but many had had as bad experiences as in their own family. They were abused in foster care or they were abused in state care. So not only were they abused in their family, they were also then abused by the system. So that book was really about changing the system, and Create has been ever since, and it's still going across the whole of Australia, about changing the system to, again, empower and give young people a voice about what's happening to them and a seat at the table and agency over what happens to their lives, even if they are removed from their parents and their family.
And
Yeah.
at that time, writing on lived experience is not a very common thing
Not common.
at all.
Nobody was happy at all about that book. It was very much yeah, there was a lot of criticism and questioning even around when Create was established. There was no other organizations really like that. The only other groups that had been established prior were maybe disability advocacy groups that had been developed by parents, established by parents of children with disabilities. But there was no group where this was the people themselves, the young people who are experiencing it themselves. So yeah, there was a lot of controversy around this. But now today, of course, there are many, many, many different groups and organizations where people are advocating for themselves and with others. And the thing I found most profound and so powerful about the book, but also about working with those young people for the first sort of 9 years that I did in setting up Create, which we kind of set up out of my garage and then it grew around the whole country, was every single one of those young people said, I'm doing this not for myself, I'm doing this for the young people who come after me. What I care about is that they have a better experience. That's why I'm telling you my story. And the stories were very raw and very powerful and also very sad, many of them. And they said, I'm only sharing this so that for the next generation of children and young people who go into care, that they will not have this experience, that their life will be different. And that I found that incredibly profound and powerful all the way through. It was incredible.
Um, um,
Amazing humans, amazing, amazing, amazing humans with lived experience.
yeah. So apart from empathy, what other things they are bringing? Okay, in mental health, because I work that way,
Mm.
like there is a certain level of honesty, certain level of psychological nuances probably we are bringing. our
Mm.
understanding is be different. For them, apart from empathy, what are the other things they are bringing? That
Yeah.
pain is actually kind of healing through that
Well, I think
human
there's a
interaction.
range of things. Number one, discovering that you're not the only person normalizes your experience, of course. So it's very important for them to find each other and say, I'm not the only person who's gone through this. It's not my fault. This has happened to many people and it's happening to many children and young people. So just removing the stigma, as you know, is incredibly important about being a child and young person in care. And also that experience does not define the rest of your life. And I think that was one of the most profound things that happened for those children and young people in care. This is something that happened to me, but it does not have to define my entire existence and my whole life. The second thing is we trained young people as consultants, so they would go and train social workers in government departments. So in every state and territory, there are child protection departments that look after these children who remove them from their families. We set up an entire consulting practice where we trained young people to go and train social workers about how to deal with people like them. So very practical, very, very good information for people who work in child protection about what's going on in the minds of a person when you show up and you remove them from your family or they get taken into care. And what could you be thinking about? What might you need to address? So that's like getting the lived experience, as you said, live. And the third thing was that these young people became exceptional advocates at a very senior level. So they were meeting with ministers and government ministers all around the country and still do to advocate for what things in the system need to change from legislation through to practice. So from advocacy to providing training and insight to actually having that kind of sense of the shared lived experience. These three things are what I think makes these kind of movements very, very successful. And Create's been, hugely successful in helping and supporting children, young people in care in Australia for over 20 years, probably 25 years now.
I think 1996,
1994 was the very
94.
first conference that we had. So yeah,
Wow.
so 30
Wow.
years.
Okay. As you have worked with these like young people
Mm.
throughout this time, what worries you most about these Gen Zs, and what do you think they have what we didn't have?
Yeah. Well, I don't need to make this up because there's lots of research on Gen Z, as we know.
Mm,
There's plenty of research. I mean, they've got an amazing capacity for empathy, huge capacity. They've been exposed to everything that's going on in the world from the beginning of their lives. So they are very connected in. It does cause them stress. So if they don't have a sense of what they might be able to do about the things that they're seeing, I think that's a real challenge. So schools and parents need to help young people have hope with action. So hope and action go together. These are two sides of one coin. So through action, you can gain hope, and through hope, you can take action. So this is very, very important for Gen Z and Gen Alpha, the group coming through, because the world is, in a very, very disrupted state, and it's also in a massive transition. So I think that's a very important thing that they have capacity for, and an amazing amount of empathy. They're obviously very powerful and can increasingly so by the time you get to Gen Alpha. They're very powerful practitioners with all the tools that are on hand. And I do genuinely think that digital tools and the technology that we have available to us can solve many, many, many problems that we have. It's just about political will in many cases. We don't, there's no reason, and there hasn't, even without these tools, by the way, for us to have hunger in the world. There's no reason. There is more than enough food in the world to feed every single person every single day. It's like literally a distribution problem, right? That's
mm,
literally what it is. So I think we've now got the tools, but I think they have a mindset to want to kind of solve and lean into some of those bigger issues. I think the challenges for them will be if they don't have that sense of hope and the ability to act, then what happens is you get the sort of start to see some anxiety rising and that can lead to mental health issues. But I do think that with the right balance of hope and action, we can absolutely give that generation, Gen Z and Gen Alpha, the kind of opportunities and the pathways to think about how they can do things, even small things where they live in their school, in their families, and in their communities. Um, so I'm not worried about them. I'm probably much more worried about adults that won't let them come and do things. I'm more worried about crazy, megalomaniacs in the world, not to mention any names,
Yep.
that kind of, are controlling the world and not actually giving and the next kind of generations the opportunity to think through how they might want to do things differently. But I see young people taking agency in many, many, many places. I see, I work with the World YMCA, and that's in 120 countries, 12,000 communities. You just see young people doing remarkable things every single day for their communities, for their families, in the most dire of circumstances, literally. So I feel very, very confident that this next generation, they're not all the same, of course, and they don't all have the same opportunities, but with education, which is the number one pathway, not a big education, you don't need a master's or MBA, but just with enough education to focus on the things that you want to do, and if young people get access to that education and to personalized learning paths, I think they'll be able to do the things that they want to do in the world. But without hope and act, they're left kind of floating and also in a sea of potential anxiety. So it's up to adults to work with them on hope and act in every
Mm,
context, no matter where they are, whether they're in India or whether they're in Ukraine or whether they're in the Congo or whether they're in Melbourne. It's the same. We all need to be working with them in the same, to help create that opportunity.
okay. So please explain what is social enterprise? And if someone wants to start a social enterprise today,
Yeah.
is it like a government funded? And please give us little insights of it.
Yeah. So I've been involved in lots of social enterprises. Even that work with Create was a social enterprise. So that's a good example. Create was a non-profit, but inside the non-profit, we set up a social enterprise, which was the consulting arm. And so what we did was we trained and paid young people with lived experience to go and provide services. And so then the revenue that came from that, they would obviously get paid, but the rest of the revenue would go into the social enterprise to employ more young people, train more young people, and so on. So, an social enterprise, in essence, in that way, any revenue that it generates goes back to the enterprise. It doesn't get distributed there's no shareholders, and it doesn't get distributed to any of the owners. It comes back into the actual enterprise. And I think that's probably the main and most serious distinction between that and an enterprise. You've now also got things called social businesses and things like B Corps. So if you are a company, and you meet a whole lot of criteria around environmental, social, planetary, community, you can register to become a B Corp. It's like you're a very good citizen. You're a very good business, and you're providing social change, or you're trying to make the world a better place, or you're trying to leave the planet in a better position. But that's still a business. They're still businesses. So the only social enterprises, really, most of them, not all of them, but most social enterprises in Australia are what we call employment social enterprises. So they're employing people. So they might be a cafe where they're employing young people who are unemployed. It might be things like Scarf, which is a social enterprise that I'm a patron of, which employs or trains new migrants in hospitality. in top restaurants in Melbourne. And then it uses the money to train more young people. So a lot are employment based. We've got everything from NDIS using laundries to train people with disabilities on service in laundries through to everything. In fact, everything that you could do in a small business, you could pretty much do as a social enterprise. Laundry, hospitality. One of the biggest social enterprises in Australia is called Good Start, which people don't know. It's an early childhood, it's childcare. But it's a social enterprise. It actually, all the money that it raises goes directly back into the company. It doesn't go to shareholders. So social enterprise is very vast and varied. A lot of it, as I said, is employment, not all of it. There are social enterprises that provide services like everything from web services or communication services or running conferences or, there's a bunch of them. There's thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of social enterprises in Australia. The biggest issue for social enterprises in Australia, to your original point, is that they're not government funded, but except very rarely. Sometimes they get government funding to start up. So I'm involved in a social enterprise called Y Careers, which got some money to get started up because it wanted to give young people opportunities to work in the care sector. So in childcare, aged care, disability care. So sometimes you might get funding to help you get set up, but it's a social enterprise as well. The main strategy with government is procurement. So can a social enterprise get government contracts in order to fulfill its mission? So the government contract could be in anything. Again, it could be in local council in landscaping, or it could be in the care economy, in, aged care. It could be in it could be in catering for government events. So, which could also be a social enterprise. And if you look around, often you'll see in corporates or in government, actually, you'll see that a social enterprise particularly is catered. And we're very lucky that we have a multicultural and diverse country, and there's many social enterprises that are run by incredible women, actually, who are bringing their culture and their food into Australian boardrooms and government offices through catering services, which is amazing, and obviously employing themselves in a social enterprise. So procurement is the main strategy with government. So procure the services of social enterprises. But yeah, it's very diverse and it's absolutely amazing. There's also a very strong First Nations social enterprise field as well. So we have First Nations products and services from construction to building to food as well in social enterprise all over
Mm,
Australia. So
nice.
it's quite amazing here, but it's kind of under the radar. I mean, I don't think the average Australian probably knows. Do you know a lot about social enterprises?
I'm forgetting the organization name. They are actually doing this with um, prisoners. Like prisoners,
Oh,
they are
like
out.
yeah, yeah, yeah. So fruit,
AESO,
fruit,
something like
fruit
that.
to work, or so I use a social enterprise in my business called Fruit to Work, and that brings fruit to workplaces every week. That's one of them. That is for former prisoners, to give people a second chance. There was one called Rebuild, which was for um, there's also one of the laundry services, I think, is also for people who are previously incarcerated, so
Mm,
prisoners. So yeah, there's a bunch of they're great. And it's really, really, really hard to run a social enterprise because unlike a business, just the sort of normal everyday business, your whole mission is to give people opportunities they haven't had before. So you need to have extra staff and extra time to support people to learn new skills and to kind of navigate their way into work because they maybe also haven't worked. They may be new to Australia and they haven't worked in Australia. So there's a lot of different ways that social enterprise can help communities and build cohesion and add massive value to communities. We're so, so, so lucky. In the UK, in Scotland, actually, they have very specific social enterprise legislation, which has been brought into privileged kind of social enterprises as people that governments do business with, to ensure that lots of different people get a chance. But social enterprise is an incredible way to start, getting into a career or into a space that if you haven't had the opportunity for whatever reason.
This social enterprise, is it coming from CSR or CSR is different?
CSR is different. So corporate social responsibility, which a lot of corporate social responsibility now has sort of moved into ESG. And so corporate social responsibility may be part of what a corporation does in utilizing social enterprise, but it hasn't come from corporate. Social enterprise has come from communities. It's been driven from communities that, and in places like Spain, you will see very, very large scale social enterprises that have got, big organizations that are running 50 different social enterprises under one umbrella. So it's got, there's huge capacity, but it comes from community. It comes from community saying these people are not getting access to work and income and the areas that they want to work and train and grow in and have the dignity of work. And this is a demand that the community has or society has, and we're going to meet these two. But we're going to do it in a very sustainable way, and we're going to do it in a way that's focused on mission and impact, not just on revenue. Of course, they are revenue generating and they do need to break even, but their reason for existence is not for profit to distribute to shareholders. That's not the reason that a social enterprise exists.
Right. On that note, hopefully we will have more and more social enterprise which will, reshape and change
All
our
over the
society for
world.
good all over the world. And with that hope, as you said before, we should end our podcast here. Thank you, Jen. Thank you for your time.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.